How's it going, everyone? It's Foxxy here. So back in the day, I used to make reviews on aftermarket PlayStation 3 controllers. Throughout all of those videos, there was always this one glaring issue I would come across with every single controller I looked at. For whatever reason, aftermarket controllers, for the most part, all seem to have terrible, just horrific analogs that don't work nearly as well as what you would get with the Sony Dualshocks. So what I intend to do is prove to you all whether or not third-party controllers make your accuracy suffer when playing shooters or other games that require precise, subtle movements. Now, I made a very similar video to this a long time ago, back when my content was kinda terrible, but I really wanted to revisit this idea because, I don't know, I guess I just find the topic of third-party controllers and analogs so interesting. And every so often, in these older reviews, I would get bombarded with these comments talking about how there's nothing wrong with these controllers that I'm reviewing, and or I should adjust the sensitivity in-game, as if that is somehow going to miraculously solve everything. Now, to be totally, completely fair here, there are some games, mostly newer ones, that allow you to change the dead zone and other specific settings with the analogs. However, most games do not offer that, especially on the PS3 and 360. I've also even been accused at one point for lying about the bad analogs of third-party controllers because I am, and I quote, a Sony fanboy. I'm not entirely sure how I'm supposed to reply to that other than saying that if you really believe that I am a Sony fanboy, you are a total fucking idiot. So the plan that I have here is I'm going to test out not just 2 controllers, but 3. First, obviously, is the Dualshock 3. Then this controller here is one that I have previously reviewed called the Snakebyte, which is one of the worst, if not the worst, third-party controller I have ever used. And as you can tell, it's brand new in the package. I have not even touched it yet. The last controller I have is the Power A Fusion. Now, I'm very excited about this one. I have never used it before. It cost $100, nearly double the price of a brand new Sony Dualshock. So I guess if there's any one controller that stands a chance of having good analog sticks and overall build quality, this is probably going to be it. So what I've done here is I have made 3 separate accounts on the PlayStation Network, and I plan to test out each one of these controllers using Call of Duty Black Ops combat training mode. I'm sure some of you are probably saying, how come I just don't play against real people online? You see, the problem with this is that there's way too many things that can interfere with the result of the experiment. Plus, these old Call of Duty games are riddled with hackers, and honestly, I am not really willing to spend hours upon hours just trying to find lobbies without hackers. With combat training, I can set up everything exactly the same throughout all 3 of the PlayStation Network accounts, with the only difference being the controller that is used. The nice thing about combat training is that they allow you to look at your stats in detail. You can even look at very specific things like how accurate you were with the MP5, for example, and how your kill death was for that particular weapon. To me, combat training is without a doubt going to be the best way for me to perform these tests. That being said, there are rules to this whole deal here, some of which are strict. You can check out these rules in the description of this video if you're interested. The way these tests will be set up is fairly simple. I'm going to play each match until I achieve 50 kills. Now, in those 10 matches, they are going to span across 5 different maps, and each match is going to have a set class that I have assigned for it. I'll set up a spreadsheet so you can better understand how everything is planned out. So for example, the first match that I will be taking part in across all 3 accounts will be on the map Nuketown. I will be using the basic SMG class with the MP5 since I do not have any access to the Creator class just yet. The second match will be played on firing range, where I will use the M16 the ASP as my sidearm, and Nova gas grenades. Nothing is going to be different between any of the accounts as far as how the matches or classes will be set up. The only difference between all 3 accounts is the controller that I will be using. That's it. Next, for a brief moment, I'll show off some gameplay from all 3 controllers, talk about them for a little bit, and then we'll get to the results of the test. Who knows, maybe some of you might be able to tell how different I performed with the controllers just from the footage alone. There's not really much I can talk about with the Dualshock other than I've always loved them. I've never had any issues with the analogs of any Dualshock I've ever owned. I think Sony completely nailed it in terms of build quality and analog quality. Have I broke one of these before? Absolutely, but those were back in the day when I used to rage like a motherfucker back when Call of Duty 4, Bad Company 2, and Modern Warfare 2 were still fresh. But since I started collecting games and started really taking care of my stuff, honestly, I haven't really raged in years, which is more than likely due to the fact I don't play much online stuff anymore. Let me just say this about the Snakebyte. I will never, and I mean never, use this controller again for any reason. The entire time I was using this, I wanted to fucking kill myself. The sensitivity and the dead zone on the analogs is so painfully bad. Like, you could actually push the analog maybe a few millimeters from side to side and nothing happens. Another wonderful problem I was having is that sometimes the R1 button would just not do anything. I'd be sitting there aiming at a guy and just get killed because the R1 wasn't responding when I would press it down. The final annoying problem I was having with this controller is that it takes a lot more force to push in the L3 stick to sprint, and after like 30 minutes, my thumb was not having any part of it. Now, the Fusion was interesting to say the least. I don't want to give out too much info on this controller because I do plan to review it in the future. Did I have problems with the analogs? Yes, unfortunately, which honestly I expected that, but the problems I had were not nearly to the same degree as the vast majority of third-party controllers I have used prior to the Fusion. It's set up like the 360 with it having the offset analogs. I don't like that personally. It's not a natural position for me, but being that I've used Xbox controllers for years, it didn't take any time for me to get used to it. Alright, so now that all the tests have been completed, let's go ahead and compare the 3 controllers, starting with the overall stats. Right off the bat, you can definitely tell there's quite a few things going on here. Oh, and the 501 kills I got with the Dualshock, yeah, one of those was a panic knife, so oops. Anyway, the Dualshock I only died 54 times, while the Snakebyte was almost double at 101. And then the Fusion fared better at 73 deaths. The kill-death ratio reflects that, with the Dualshock being at a 9.28, Snakebyte 4.95, and the Power A Fusion at a 6.85. The overall accuracy between the Dualshock and the Fusion weren't too far off, being only a few points in difference. The Snakebyte was almost 10% worse than the Sony Dualshock, which is pretty significant. Next, let's dig deeper by looking at individual gun stats, starting with the kill-death ratio per gun. I didn't exactly get enough kills with the pistols to really talk about them much, so we'll just focus on the 5 primary weapons I used. The MP5K, oddly enough, I did better with the Fusion controller than the Dualshock by a decent amount. The M16, however, both of the 2 aftermarket controllers did nearly half the kill death compared to the Dualshock. The M14 results weren't as dramatic for the Fusion, although the Snakebyte again had nearly half the kill death as the Sony. The RPK fared about the same, a few points in difference between the Sony to the Fusion, whereas the Snakebyte did about half as much as the Sony. The biggest result from all this came from our sniper here, where the Sony pulled a 13.5 kill death, and the Fusion I only achieved a 5.29. That's about, I think, a 60% difference between the two. Now, as I figured, because using the Dragunov with the Snakebyte was truly an ungodly experience, I did horribly with it, only scoring a 3.08. And if we're going by percentage points again, I think that's around a 75% difference between the two. So it's fair to say that just from looking at the overall stats and the kill death portion alone, you can obviously tell that using a third-party controller for games that require you to have precise aiming is going to hinder you, not help you in really any way. But of course, that leaves us with the final results. The accuracy per gun, which is arguably the most important result of this whole experiment here. With the MP5, I was surprised that even though the Fusion had a higher kill death than the Dualshock, the accuracy was still lower by a few points. And I believe I know why that was. When I was rewatching a little bit of the footage, I would notice that with the Fusion, I would actively avoid mid to long range firefights because I knew I was going to lose them. So what I didn't realize up until now is that what I ended up doing here is I altered my playstyle to a much more closer range than I would normally with this specific gun. Now with the Snakebyte, the accuracy was off by a large degree, nearly 10 percentage points worse than the Dualshock. The pistols as a whole barely had any difference in accuracy except the Snakebyte's Makarov result, which could have been due to me not using that gun as much as I did with the other controllers, so I'm going to rule out the pistols for not having conclusive enough evidence to really support anything. The M16, I was shocked to see I did worse with the Fusion controller than the Snakebyte. It was the only result on the accuracy portion where the Snakebyte actually fared better than the Fusion. However, that might have just been a fluke result because the analogs on the Snakebyte are, believe me, much worse than the Fusion. So next up is the M14. I had a very difficult time using this with the Snakebyte, and that shows considering the difference between that controller versus the other two. I was shocked, however, to see that I still managed a decent percentage with the M14. However, I think part of that is due to me taking more time to line up my shots compared to how I would normally with the Dualshock, and that was very apparent when you go back and compare the kill death stats. And that same trend would continue with what I felt was the most important gun from our whole test here, the Dragunov. I achieved a 65.1% accuracy with the Sony, a 62 with the Fusion, and a 58.15 with the Snakebyte. I feel like this is the most important result since sniping requires way more precision than any of the other weapons, so if a controller's analogs are shit, it's going to be incredibly obvious when you actually experience these controllers firsthand. The Snakebyte, much like the M14, I had an absolute miserable time aiming at the enemy. I would constantly aim too much to the left or too much to the right, when I would only try to make subtle movements to my aim, and as a result, I made myself incredibly vulnerable to the enemy's shots. Same goes with the Fusion. Aiming with the sniper wasn't super easy, but it's nowhere near as bad as the Snakebyte. These problems I was having, and being that I had to take way longer to pull off an accurate shot, is why my kill death was so massively different between all three controllers. The last gun is the RPK. Now, I specifically picked this weapon out because it has quite a lot of recoil, and I wondered how that would affect my aim with these aftermarket controllers. I was sorta impressed with these results in a way. I honestly thought I performed way worse than I did. Anyway, I got a 33 with the Dualshock, a 31 with the Fusion, and of course in last place, why wouldn't it have been, was the Snakebyte at just under 26. One major thing to keep in mind here is that if you are just going by accuracy alone, you might think, the Fusion controller performed actually pretty well. But when you break everything down and look at both the kill death and the accuracy, you see that in reality, the Fusion didn't really come all that close to performing as well as the Dualshock whatsoever, which again, this is a $100 MSRP controller. It really should have ridiculously good and responsive analogs for that price. Another very important factor to remember here is that this was all done on combat training against bots. This doesn't take lag or actual experienced players into the equation whatsoever, so these results would be totally different in the real world. Think about it. It was hard enough for me to aim at barely moving targets with these third-party controllers. Imagine playing against a group of mildly competent players who actually somewhat know what the fuck they're doing. My stats with these, and most if not all third-party controllers, would be atrocious compared to what I would have achieved with the Dualshock. So I hope you all have learned something from this. The goal here wasn't to shit on third-party controllers either. Believe me, I want companies to come up with controllers. I have no issues with that. All I ask is for them to make quality products that are as good, if not better, than the house brand. Unfortunately, I have yet to find a third-party controller that has met those expectations. The Fusion has been by far one of the best I've used, but even then, it still has its issues. I'll probably continue to use it for fighting games, puzzles, action adventures, and others, but for shooting games or anything that really needs good quality analogs, there's just no way. I don't think I've ever asked this before, just because it's not really my thing. I almost think it's somewhat hacky, honestly. But if you really enjoyed the video and thought it was interesting or informative, do me a huge favor here and hit the like button, share the video, comment, show me some love. It does mean a lot to me. Thank you all very much for watching, everyone.